Tonight we are looking at 3 horrifying caving stories that went horribly wrong. A boulder that balanced for 1,000 years settles onto a caver's boot inside Cueva de los Tallos. One step on fresh glaze becomes a 40-meter slide toward a frozen lake deep in KUNGUR Ice Cave. And a boot wedges in a flooded rift of peak Cavern as the hills upstream begin to pay in their rain. Each story starts with confidence and ends in chaos. As always, viewer discretion is advised. On May 2nd, 2026, Mateo Rios rappelled through a hole in the hot Amazon jungle floor of Ecuador into Cueva de los Tallos, the only cave that once pulled an astronaut into its dark, a river-carved labyrinth of galleries so strange that expeditions have hunted legends in it for 50 years. His survey team had 5 days inside, rigged the entrance shaft's rope, mapped the far galleries past the boulder chokes, and be out before the wet season closed the jungle trails. Mateo was 37 years old, an expedition caver who had logged 15 years in the caves of the Andes and the Amazon, the quiet one teams built their rigging around. His habit was older than his logbook. At every boulder field he knocked on the big stones and listened, because a stone that rings hollow, his mentor taught him, is a stone still deciding. The plan for day 2 was the long middle gallery, 3 hours of walking passage and 2 boulder chokes, with the far survey stations waiting beyond. Here is what you need to understand about a boulder choke. It is not a pile that settled long ago. It is a pile still settling. 10,000 tons of old ceiling braced against itself, holding its own weight by friction and habit. Cavers cross them every day, everywhere, safely, on one condition. You move through the stones the way you leave a sleeping dog, quietly, predictably, and without ever putting your body where a stone wants to go. The first choke passed in 20 easy minutes. Knuckle knocks ringing solid, boots scraping over slabs the size of tables, the team threading gaps in single file with their packs passed hand to hand. The middle gallery beyond ran wide and dry, its ceiling lost to their lamps. The second choke was the one the old surveys marked with a note in the margin: moves in wet years. Halfway through it, that is when the mountain shrugged in its sleep, a grinding note from somewhere above the root, short and deep, because a wet April had been oiling the choke's joints for weeks, and the margin note had already failed. The team froze in their gaps, and the grinding settled, and the choke went quiet again, almost all of it. What he didn't know, standing last in the line with his boot braced on a low slab, the shrug had traveled, and that stone would now finish its 1,000-year decision. The anvil-shaped block beside his ankle eased down 2 centimeters and closed on his boot like a drawer. The weight arrived slow and total, like a hand closing. His boot was in the jaws. He was stuck. Panic knocked on the stone, because this is the cruelty of a settling choke. It does not crush, it clamps. The anvil had stopped exactly where the boot held it, and the next shrug, whenever the mountain chose, would not ask permission. One man pinned at the ankle, 10 tons on the decision. 3 hours from the entrance shaft, in a cave the jungle hides from helicopters. Watch the ledger the team built in the choke. Rule 1, spoken out loud by Mateo himself through his teeth. Nobody digs, nobody pries at the anvil. A choke answers force with force. Rule 2, build before you lift. The strongest 2 went back for the rigging kit, while the third packed stones under the anvil's free edge, a nest of supports, so that whatever moved next could only move onto rock. Put yourself in that gap for 1 hour of it, your foot numb below a stone older than your country, the choke ticking and settling somewhere overhead in the dark, and your own voice, keeping the team slow, because the fastest rescue in a choke is the one that never wakes it. At 1 hour, the supports were packed and the hand jack from the rigging kit sat seated on fresh stone. At 2 hours, the jack had taken the anvil's edge up 1 centimeter, then 2, the boot leather creaking as the jaws unclenched. At 3 centimeters, Mateo's foot slid free, sock and all, and the team let the jack down as gently as they had raised it, leaving the boot in the jaws, a leather offering the choke could keep. The choke ground once more as they cleared it, long and low, like a door closing on an empty room. Mateo walked the 3 hours out on a spare camp shoe and an ankle the color of a storm, roped between two friends, and came up the entrance shaft into jungle rain that had never felt so warm. At the top, he sat down, took off the camp shoe, and knocked twice on the bedrock with his knuckle, solid, before he let anyone look at the ankle. He survived with bruised bones and a boot-shaped debt, and the expedition report ruled the escape a model choke rescue and printed its arithmetic for the clubs. 0 prying, 1 nest of supports, 1 hand jack, 3 centimeters of lift, 3 hours of patience. The choke had failed to keep anything but leather. The second choke of Teos carries a new margin note now, in 2 languages. Moves in wet years, cross high, cross fast, cross light. Mateo still knocks on the big stones with a knuckle, and his teams have learned to hear what he hears. A choke is a rockfall that paused, he tells them at the first slab. It owes you nothing. Knock politely, listen hard, and if the mountain shrugs, give it your boot before it asks for more. On January 24th, 2026, Alina Kim walked through the frosted tunnel of Kungur in Russia, into air that glittered, into the first cave that Russia ever opened to visitors. An underground winter of ice grottos and frozen lakes that has been dressing itself in crystals for 10,000 years. The tourist route was closed for the season's maintenance week, and her job was the back route. Check the wild galleries beyond the lit paths, where the survey markers live and the handrails do not. Alina was 30 years old, a guide in training who had logged 4 winters in the show caves of the Urals, steady on ice the way other people are steady on pavement. Her mentor had drilled one lesson above all the others, on a rope, on a slope, until her body knew it. If the ice ever takes you, spin to your belly and dig, elbows, toes, spread wide, because a slide you fight flat is a slide you can win. The plan that morning was 4 hours alone on the back route with a radio, spikes on her boots, and 11 marker stations to check. Here is what you need to understand about a cave made of ice slopes. The floor is not a floor, it is a frozen river of angles. Meltwater from the warm months refreezes through autumn into ramps and aprons, polished by air currents until they shine like poured glass. The show route tames its slopes with steps and rails. The back route does not. Out there, the cave keeps its angles wild, and the spikes on your boots are the whole conversation. The first 7 stations passed like a winter postcard. Grottos hung with frost feathers, her breath clicking into crystals, boot spikes biting the glassy floors with that clean squeak ice keeps for the coldest days. She checked markers, photographed 2, and radioed her 7s on schedule. Station 8 sat at the top of the long apron the old guides call the toboggan run, 40 meters of polished slope dropping away to the shore of a frozen lake. At the apron's lip, that is when the cave collected for the postcard. Her right spike skated on a lens of new ice, glacier than the seasons, because a warm snap 2 weeks back had glazed the slope with a fresh pour, and the boot's whole conversation had already failed. She caught herself once on the marker post, and the post's old bolt turned in its socket. What she didn't know, weight swinging past the post, the mentor's drill was 9 seconds from its final exam, and that habit would now have to work on real glass in real dark. Spin to the belly, dig wide, because the bolt let go, and the toboggan run took her. The slope took her feet and accelerated. Lamplight spun wall to ceiling. Panic slid with her. She was falling sideways. The lake waited below. Because this is the physics of a cave slide. Ice does not tire, and it does not flatten. The run steepens toward the lake shore, and a body that reaches the bottom arrives at the speed the slope chooses, onto ice of a thickness nobody has tested. One woman on 40 meters of poured glass. A radio somewhere on the slope above. And a frozen lake waiting at the bottom with its lid on. Watch the drill fire in the dark, second by second. 1. Spin. She threw her right shoulder over and got her belly to the ice, face down the slope. 2. Dig. elbows hammered in, toes of both spiked boots dragged like anchors, body spread wide as her mentor's chalk drawing on the briefing room floor. Put yourself on that slope for those 9 seconds. The ice hissing under your jacket like a blade being sharpened. Your lamp showing you exactly how much run is left. And a voice from 4 winters of drills counting in your ear. Elbows, toes, wide, dig. At 30 meters, the drag began to bite, and the hiss dropped a tone. At 35, she was sliding at a walk. At 38 meters, 2 body lengths from the lakeshore, the toboggan run let her stop, spread-eagled, spikes in, breathing smoke. She lay still for 10 breaths, testing the world. Then she began the crab crawl back up the margin of the slope, where old rough ice gave her spikes their voice back. 10 meters, rest. 10 meters, collecting the dropped radio at the halfway rock like a prize. Her call went out from the top of the apron, voice level, vocabulary official. Station 8 bolt failed, slope reglazed, guide uninjured, returning by the high gallery. The duty officer met her at the junction of the lit path with a thermos and no lecture. The radio log had already told him everything, including the 9 seconds between her last 7 and her next transmission. They walked out through the frosted tunnel together, past the grottos dressed in crystals, and Alina touched the handrail of the show route like an old friend. She survived on a drill and 9 seconds of obedience to it, and the cave's incident report ruled the arrest textbook and printed its numbers for the guide school. 40 meters of slope, 38 surrendered, 2 body lengths of margin, 0 injuries. The slope had failed to reach the lake with her. The first cave that Russia ever opened to visitors still dresses itself in crystals each winter. And the toboggan run wears a fixed line now, all seasons, with Station 8's marker on a new bolt in fresh rock. Alina passed her guide exam in the spring, and the mentor who drilled her added her 9 seconds to the briefing, chalk drawing and all. The ice does not tire, she tells the new trainees on the practice slope, and neither does the drill. Spin to your belly, dig wide, and make your peace with the mountain, keeping your last 2 body lengths. That margin is the drill's to give, and yours to earn. On March 14th, 2026, Douglas Fenn walked under the cold, gritstone lip of Peak Cavern in England, through an entrance so vast that ropemakers lived and worked inside it for 400 years, the mouth of a wet limestone system that drains half the hills above Castleton. He went in with 2 clubmates for a classic wet weather reconnaissance. Checked the streamway levels ahead of the club's Easter trip, 5 hours down and back. Douglas was 44 years old, a club caver who had logged 25 years in the wet caves of the Peak District, the leader other leaders phoned. His habit was famous at the clubhouse. He called the river gauge before every wet trip and wrote the number inside his helmet. Because the streamway, he liked to say, reads the same gauge, just later. That morning the gauge said falling, the forecast said showers, and the plan said turn around at the far duck no later than 2. Here is what you need to understand about the rifts of a wet cave. The stream does not just flow through them, it furnishes them. Every wet season rearranges the cobbles and jams fresh stones in the tight slots of the floor. A rift you have waded 100 times is never twice the same rift. The rule the Peak clubs teach is short. In a rift, place your feet like you would place your fingers. Nothing goes anywhere it cannot come straight back out of. The trip in ran like the old friend it was, the show cave lights giving way to the wild streamway, boots pattering through shin-deep water, the vaulted rifts echoing every splash into applause. They made the far duck by 1:30, ahead of schedule. The water at the duck sat exactly where the helmet number predicted, and they turned for home on time, in good order, in light rain they could not feel. In the long rift before the junction, that is when the hills sent their reply. A new tone in the streamway behind them, low and patient, because the showers had parked over the catchment and become one steady hour of rain, and the falling gauge had already failed. Douglas waved his clubmates through the rift ahead of him and took the tail, the leader's place in rising water. What he didn't know, stepping down the rift's narrowing floor, The last flood had furnished it freshly. And that turn would ask a price. His boot slid heel first into a new slot between two jammed cobbles, and the streamway's pace shoved him half a step forward before his shout stopped the line. He pulled, and the boot turned to stone. The water climbed his shin. His mates were back in seconds. He was stuck. Panic waded in with the stream. Because this is the oldest trap in wet caving, a wedged boot in a rising streamway. The slot holds like a drawer, the heel cannot lift, and the water does not pause its argument while you compose yours. One man anchored at the ankle, water at the knee and climbing. Two mates, one rift, and a catchment upstream still paying in. Watch the hour the three of them built, because everything in it was right. The laces cut in 10 seconds flat, and the heel still would not draw, the slot pinching boot and bone alike. One mate braced Douglas against the current, chest to chest, buying him airspace. The other went for the crowbar truth, a hammered chalkstone, a sling round the boot, a hauling angle rigged from a natural thread above the rift. Put yourself in that rift for 1 minute of it. The water at your waist, then your ribs, patient as a tide with a schedule. Two friends working in the spray with hands going wooden. And your own helmet, with a number inside it that was true this morning. At 20 minutes, the sling haul gained a centimeter, and the slot took it back. At 40, the water reached his chest, and the streamway's voice filled the rift wall to wall. At 50 minutes, the mate at his chest was holding his chin, and the work had become a race the water was refereeing. At the hour, on a 5 count and a prayer, the sling, the bar, and both men heaved as one, and the boot came free with a crack of cobble, 1 hour too late for the argument overhead. They carried him to the high ledge above the rift and worked on him there, in turns, by the book, in the roar, while the streamway ran its flood beneath their knees. The cave rescue came in through the great entrance at dusk, called by the overdue procedure Douglas himself had written for the club, and brought the three of them out through the chamber where the ropemakers once worked. Douglas Fenn drowned in a rift he had waded 100 times, held by a slot the last flood had furnished that winter, with the rescue done right on every side of him. The water had only ever said one thing, and it had said it on schedule, the schedule inside his own helmet. The inquest ruled the death entrapment drowning in flood conditions, and its verdict became the Peak Club's wet weather law within the season. In rising water, the rift floors are strangers. Feet go only where the eye has been first, and a parked shower counts as a flood until proven otherwise. There is a brass gauge plate by the clubhouse door now, his helmet number engraved at the top, and the Easter trip he was scouting runs every year in his name. Dry weather only, feet placed like fingers. The entrance that housed the ropemakers still swallows the winter light each afternoon, and the streamway still reads the same gauge as the hills, 3 hours late. Call the number, the clubs teach now. Write it in your helmet. And when the water starts a new argument behind you, the cave has already won it. Leave the rift to the stream and take the high road home.